There's a conversation to be had about the dangers and merits of comparing one game to another. On the one hand, it's an easy to understand point of reference. Saying X is similar to Y, so if you like Y, you'll probably like X, is a much quicker and more concise way of explaining how a game works than spending 20 minutes explaining in painful detail the mechanics of a thing. But on the other hand, you run the risk of stripping away a game's identity. A good example of this comes after the launch of Final Fantasy VII, with many other JRPGs, which were all great by their own merits, being labelled not as good as Final Fantasy VII, when in fact they were just different. There's also a fine line between homage and blatant rip-off, and which side something falls on usually comes down to the creator's intent. We've seen this time and again with the endless sea of subpar roguelikes and souls-likes that flood the market on a weekly basis, and the survival horror genre is just as flooded with cheap knockoffs, asset flips and cash grabs as anything else. I bring this up because Signalis is as close to a perfect recreation of PlayStation 1 era survival horror classics as you can get, while also fixing a lot of the issues many of those games have. It doesn't so much wear its influences on its sleeve, instead opting to wear them as a rather fancy patchwork suit. Elements of Resident Evil, Silent Hill and Alien are immediately apparent, but unlike other games where this kind of heavy-handed homage would make the game feel derivative, Rose Engine, the game's developers, do it with a wink and a smile. The game is littered with Easter eggs, like a recognisable carpet from a particularly spooky hotel, or a room with a piano where a distinct sonata instantly recognisable to Resident Evil fans plays. It's clear then that the intent of the developers was to take elements of games and movies they love and craft them into a beautifully composed love letter, and in that, they succeeded. I've been waiting for Signalis since 2020 when I saw a brief trailer during one of the many indie showcases that summer. I'm a huge fan of survival horror, and this trailer was ticking all the right boxes for me. It had a cool visual style and seems to show off the right mix of combat, exploration and puzzles. And combat itself actually looked good, which is something a lot of games get wrong. I was into it, and I've been excited about it ever since. But nothing kills hype like hype, and there was no way it could live up to the hype I'd created for it in my own head, could it? The short answer is yes. Signalis is fucking excellent, and hands down one of the best and most affecting games I've played this year. In Signalis, you play as Elster, a technician replica who, after waking up from cryostasis on a crashed ship on a frozen planet, goes in search of her lost partner and her lost dreams. I'm paraphrasing that from the Steam and Humble descriptions because I am not smart enough to understand what is actually happening. As is standard procedure in all good survival horror games, the broader story is unveiled through documents found throughout Elsa's journey, helping you piece together the mystery and get some background on the world we're inhabiting. The game's Humble page names Stanley Kubrick, Hideaki Anno and David Lynch as its main inspiration, so that should give you an idea of what to expect tonally and narratively without giving anything away. But let me tell you, it gets weird, like really, really weird, but also strangely beautiful and moving in a way. And I'm not ashamed to admit that by the time the end credits rolled, my chest ached and my eyes were a bit wet. And as much as I'd like to explain what a replica is, give you details on this mysterious planet, and explain what lost dreams means, I'm not going to, because this game's story is absolutely something you should uncover and experience for yourself. There will definitely be an open discussion about what's happening in Signalis, and I cannot wait to see how other people are interpreting the story. Exploring the world of Signalis is one of the most streamlined and enjoyable experiences I can remember having in a survival horror game. First of all, when exploring, the camera angle is a consistent Metal Gear Solid-esque top-down, so getting turned around due to an ever-changing camera never became an issue. The map itself auto-fills as you explore, marking rooms you've been in, clearly labelling them for future reference. Points of interest are clearly marked too, at first with a symbol that looks like a shield outlined in red, changing to a grey outline whenever you've done what needs to be done in that room. Doors are colour-coded and update automatically, with blue being the ones you can enter, red being ones that are locked and permanently inaccessible, and yellow being the ones that can be opened once you found the correct key or item to do so. It took me a minute to realise the red doors could never be opened, and at first I felt overwhelmed by the sheer amount of locked doors and rooms I thought needed to be opened and explored, but luckily that wasn't the case. They're just there as decoration to help sell the size and scope of the areas you're investigating, while never filling them up with meaningless busywork. The The world of Signalis is split into several areas with no backtracking once an area has been completed, giving the game a linear, structured progression that I found incredibly satisfying. Clearing the map felt methodical, and seeing yellow doors turn blue, red points of interest turn grey, and the map itself fill out, I'd get a sense of advancement as I could see myself getting closer to my goal at the completion of an area. While exploring, you'll need to be on the lookout for key items to move forward, additional weapons, healing items, and ammo. Ammo is scarce, with most pickups only being 2 or 3 bullets or shells, and carried ammo is capped, with you only being able to carry 20 additional handgun bullets, 10 additional shotgun shells, and so on. Healing in Signalis is weird, and one of the things I think people are going to take issue with. There are 3 types of health items: Repair Patch that heals a small amount of health, Repair Spray that heals slightly more, and Repair Spray Plus that heals the most. It sounds like a good selection on paper, but healing items really don't do a lot at all. Patches are basically useless on their own, and sprays aren't that much better, so it's best to save and combine them into Repair Spray Plus, but doing this subsequently reduces the number of available healing items substantially. So my advice to you is this: don't get hit. Like ammo, health items also have a carry cap of 10, but that's a much more forgiving number than carryable ammo, and when I'd gotten used to how the game plays, I stopped carrying health items with me altogether. You see, Elster can only carry 6 items at once, and those spaces soon fill up once you're carrying a gun or guns, or equipable items like the stun rod, flare, or flashlight, which is pretty essential. Then there are keys and puzzle items, and you still need space in your inventory to pick up new items, and yeah, as I said, those 6 spaces fill up quickly. Luckily, one of the main things Signalis borrows from Resident Evil is its save room, complete with its own save room theme and magic storage box. The storage box has no limit to how much can be stored in there, so drop everything you find in it as soon as you can. Remember when I said completing areas felt methodical? This is a big part of that. I'd play by carrying a handgun and a secondary like a shotgun, both fully loaded with no additional ammo on my person. I'd carry an equipable item and change it up depending on what I was doing. Exploring a dark area, flashlight. Clearing an area of enemies for good, flare, etc. That'd leave 3 additional spaces for pickups, so the metagame of clearing out a room of items, running back to the storage box to drop off my booty, and then moving on to the next room began. One nice touch is if your inventory is full and you try to collect ammo, if you're carrying the weapon that ammo is for and it isn't fully loaded, the ammo you're trying to pick up will go directly into that weapon. It's a mechanic that I can only assume was a byproduct of the devs knowing how limiting this inventory system is, but it's one I'm very grateful for. These constant trips to the storage box are the reason I stopped carrying ammo and health items. I'd return so frequently to drop items off that I'd use it as the time to reload my weapons, combine health items, and heal if I needed to. Writing it down just now, it actually sounds like a nightmare, and I've seen people online complain about how limiting the inventory is to the point the developers have addressed it, but personally, I love it. It feels like another puzzle within a world full of puzzles, and it stimulates this weird part of my brain that craves structure and order. And speaking of puzzles, the ones in Signalis are superb, and some of the best I've experienced in recent memory. When interacting with a combination lock or puzzle, the camera shifts to first person, which I have to admit looked jarring in the trailers, but in practice this shift in perspective is both intuitive and immersive. And as silly as it sounds, when playing on Steam Deck, I love using the touchscreen to input codes on safes and doors. The puzzles range from simple to more complex, but nothing I'd consider truly taxing. They're mostly self-explanatory or explained in literature found nearby, and the ones that are more complicated or multifaceted start to fall into place as you explore the level collecting components. But regardless of difficulty, they all have their eureka moment and you feel smarter for solving them, or at least I did. There were 2 I wouldn't say I struggled with, but they certainly strained my brain more than the others. One required basic knowledge of how pin tumbler locks work, which I didn't have, so ended up trying various solutions until it worked. And the other had me needing to open a safe, but no matter where I looked, I could not find the combination. I ended up brute forcing it by trying different letter combinations of words relevant to the game until eventually it opened. I've played through the game twice now and didn't find the combination to that safe on either, so I'd love to know the official way of figuring it out. These victories felt a little hollow to me as they seemed to exist outside of the game's own rule set for puzzles. and solving them with guesswork and perseverance felt like I wasn't playing correctly, but maybe that was the point. One of the most interesting features of Signalis is the radio. Once it's been collected, it can be tuned to different frequencies and is used to solve a multitude of puzzles, acquire lock combinations, and even defeat a particular enemy type in combat. It's a great mechanic that organically fits with the game's other elements and helps elevate Signalis beyond just another Resident Evil clone. Combat in Signalis feels excellent. Holding the left trigger brings up a laser sight which can be aimed with the right stick. When targeting an enemy, a red box appears over them, and the longer you hold your aim, the smaller the box gets. From what I can tell, a smaller target box indicates better accuracy and higher damage. This adds a risk-reward element to combat, as you have to decide if you're going to fire early at the approaching monsters, or wait a couple of seconds for the perfect shot, potentially saving ammo. Trying to fire your weapon if an enemy is too close will make Elster push them away, adding a rudimentary parry system into the mix that's easy to pull off and extremely useful when you're cornered or taking too long to line up a shot. It definitely saved my arse on a few occasions. The first time an enemy is dropped to the floor, they'll flail about, giving you a window to kick them, similar to the stomp mechanic in Dead Space. But that's not the end of it. Downed enemies will get up again after a time, and when they do is seemingly random, adding to the tension. Enemies can be killed permanently by dropping flares on them, similar to the lighter and gasoline system in the Resident Evil remake. And seeing as this is a survival horror, flares are extremely limited, and deciding when and where to use them can have a huge impact on ammo count, but figuring out when and where to use them is half the fun. Another limited combat item is the stun rod, which is good for one hit and will instantly drop any regular enemy to the floor ready for a kicking. I'm a huge fan of this weapon, which has its sheer power balanced out by how scarce they are, but it did have me wishing for a regular melee option, like a knife, for when ammo gets low or you're feeling brave, and the opportunity for a knife only run would have been nice. There's a decent selection of weapons to find, ranging from genre standards like the pistol, shotgun and revolver, to interesting and fun additions which I won't spoil for you here. Each weapon feels distinct and packs a nice punch. Just remember to reload when you're empty, or switch auto reload on in the options. It's also worth mentioning that there are a handful of bosses, but with the exception of the final boss, they're pretty unspectacular. And I'm pretty sure one of them is just a bullet sponge and dies when you're close to running out of ammo. I adore Signalis' visuals. I think it looks amazing. The PS1 inspired graphics evoke the old school survival horror feel that the devs were going for, and I'm a huge fan of the retro futuristic aesthetic used for both the world and characters, clearly inspired by Ridley Scott and Masamune Shirow. As you explore these cold, uninviting clinical rooms and corridors, absorbing the propaganda pasted across the walls, the feeling of isolation is palpable, and there's something about seeing it in faux 32-bit polygons that just heightens it. It brings that horror back around to a place of nostalgia. The enemy design is pretty great too, with each monster type being distinct in silhouette, so you know at a glance what they are and how to avoid or dispatch them. But a heavy atmosphere can't be built on visuals alone. You need a solid soundtrack too, and the musical score by Cicada Sirens and 1000 Eyes is absolutely incredible. The use of distorted, almost dreamy piano heightens the feeling of melancholy, isolation and dread, and the added effect of making it sound like it's being played back on warped cassette tape complements the often repeated static radio, as well as the retro future take on in-game technology itself. The use of Raindrop Prelude by Chopin perfectly sets the tone of oppressive horror to follow, and the ear-piercing industrial cacophony that assaults your ears whenever enemies are alerted to your presence is physically felt as much as it is heard. The graphics and music combine to create a near-perfect audio-visual experience, and I cannot praise them enough. As much as I love Signalis, nothing is infallible, and I do have one or two complaints that are actually closer to nitpicks, but in the name of transparency I feel I should mention them. First off, and I actually feel bad for saying this, I do not like the anime character portraits at all. I don't think they're particularly well done, and when used in cutscenes I find they detract from the awesome in-game visuals on display. Even without facial expressions, the 3D models are animated so beautifully that it's possible to tell which emotions they're eliciting. And then, anime face. I find the design and colours so at odds with the in-game visuals it's jarring, like if you were playing Metal Gear Solid and randomly during cutscenes it had cut to fan art for a few frames. No shade to the artist, I'm sure they did their best, it's just not for me. Secondly, I played this through on Xbox Series S and had no performance issues at all, but when playing on a 512GB model Steam Deck, I noticed frequent frame drops whenever the deck was thinking. This is likely just a thing with the Steam Deck, and not the game itself, but I still think it's worth mentioning for those of you who want to play it on Valve's handheld. And finally, and this is just a general complaint I have with games, as I mentioned earlier, when you have a full inventory and a gun equipped and try to pick up ammo for that gun, instead of telling you don't have space to carry the ammo, it will automatically load the bullets into the gun. Why then, when trying to pick up a health item with full inventory, is there no option to just use it there and then? Again, more a general complaint about how games deal with their inventory systems, but Signalis is the latest to get me asking, why can't I just use this now? So I wanted to bring it up. At the risk of sounding hyperbolic, Signalis isn't just one of the best games I've played this year, it's one of the best games I've ever played. And that feat is made all the more impressive by the fact the majority of it was made by 2 people. Seriously, 2 people made this. That's insane. Signalis is, for all intents and purposes, a masterpiece of survival horror. It plays like a love letter to the genre and shows off its Easter eggs and borrowed mechanics with a wink and a smile. I've played through it twice now and it was a genuine pleasure each time, and I'll definitely be playing through it again to try and get the elusive true ending, because of course it has multiple endings. If you love survival horror, you owe it to yourself to play this, and when you do, I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. But until next time, thanks for watching and I will see you in the next video.